Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining me again today on the Truth Finders class. And we are in Ecclesiastes. We are in chapter 12, the final chapter, and we'll be discussing that chapter along with the concluding thoughts at the very end. I do want to summarize last week's lesson, though, that we looked at the value of benevolence and diligence of wise behavior in view of the uncertain future. We also looked at advice to the young and joyful living. Well, this week we'll still look at the final chapter with the continuation of advice directed to the young. So they are told to remember God in their youth before difficult days come in which there will be found little pleasure. Such days are described through a series of illustrations that depict the feebleness of old age and eventual death. When the inevitable happens, the body will decay back to dust, and the spirit will return to God who gave it. The preacher brings his sermon to a close by restating his theme, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. An epilogue is added that informs the reader of the work the preacher continued to do after concluding his search for the meaning of life. Because because of his wisdom, he still taught the people and sought to set in order many proverbs. He sought to find acceptable and upright words, words of truth. Such words of the wise and scholarly are described as goads and well-driven nails, given by one shepherd. One is to be admonished by these words, yet be aware that there is no end to the making of many books, and much study is wearisome to the flesh. Finally, we're told the grand conclusion of the whole matter. The preacher ends his search for meaning by concluding that the whole purpose for man's existence is to fear God, keep his commandments. That is because God will bring into judgment everything we have done. Well, we're going to break this down this week. And if you have your Bible, you can open it up, follow me as we read through the Bible together. And I'll be repeating a lot of what the summary that I just gave you, but I want this to really sink in because this is the key chapter to it all. It's the summary of everything that we've learned over the past 12 weeks. So in the first verse, we are looking at, in verses 1 through 7, advice to the young and responsible living. The first verse, remember God in your youth, the basic imperative. Well, verse 1, read along with me, tells us, remember also your Creator in the days of your youth, before the evil days come, and the years draw near, when you will say, I have no delight in them. Well, our interpretation tells us, again, Solomon began with a clear statement of his point, then proceeded to prove and illustrate its truth in the verses that follow. Remember means to live your life with what you know about God clearly in view, not just to remember that there is a God. Creator denotes God as the one to whom we are responsible because we are His creatures. The evil days are the days of old age and death. Well, verses 2 through 5 tell us to reflect upon what is coming, old age. Read along with me, verse 2. Before the sun and the light, the moon and the stars are darkened, and the clouds return after the rain, and the day that the watchmen of the house tremble and mighty men stoop, the grinding ones stand idle because they are few, and those who look through the windows grow dim. Verse 4, and the doors on the street are shut as the sound of the grinding mill is low, and one will rise at the sound of the bird, and all the daughters of song will sing softly. Furthermore, men are afraid of a high place and of terrors on the road. The almond tree blossoms, the grasshopper drags himself along, and the caperberry is ineffective, for man goes to his eternal home while mourners go about in the street. Now, in these verses, there's a lot of symbolism. So I'm going to kind of break this down, and you can look at these verses again. But some interpreters believe the writer was describing the aging process, which is what I believe he's doing here. And others believe death is the emphasis. I believe it's the aging process. Perhaps old age leading to death is the best option. So let's look at verses 2 through 3. Solomon likened the evil days first to an approaching rainstorm that is fearful and uncertain. The Hebrews regarded any decline in a person's vital energy as a sign that death was beginning to set in. The watchman of the house in verse 3 probably refers to one's arms and hands, and the mighty men to the legs. The grinding ones are probably the teeth, those who look through windows, the eyes. Can you see that correlation? That's what I believe he's saying here. Verse 4, the doors to the street are probably the lips that are shut because of the absence of teeth in the mouth, the grinding mill. Another view is that they are the ears, and the writer alluded to the inability of old people to sleep soundly, as well as those to their loss of hearing. And I can understand that because I used to get sound rest when I was young, and I would sleep through the night in many hours. And now in my older age, I'm finding it more difficult to sleep through the night. And I toss and I turn, and it's because my bones are creaking and I hurt, and so on and so forth. So I believe this is a good analogy of that. Verse 5 states, aged individuals become more fearful of heights. I can understand that. Traffic and travel. I'm right there with you. The almond tree blossoms, white like the hair of an old person. An elderly person is less sprightly in his or her movements. The caperberry, apparently an appetite stimulant, not an aphrodisiac, is a poor translation that the Septuagint introduced. The text should read, and desire fails, which gives the same meaning. Man's dark house rather than eternal house is a reference to the grave. The coming of death in verses 6 through 7. Let's read those. Verse 6, remember him before the silver cord is broken and the golden bowl is crushed. The pitcher by the well is shattered, and the wheel at the cistern is crushed. Verse 7, then the dust will return to the earth as it was, and the spirit will return to God who gave it. Well, our interpretation here is Solomon described the end of life first as the extinguishing of a light. The golden bowl is a bowl that holds a flame. When the silver cord that holds it breaks, well, the bowl crashes to the floor and the light goes out. Gold and silver express the great value of life. The second description of death is water that one can no longer draw out of the well. The wording gives us a picture of the ruined apparatus plus the wheel as they have crushed down into the old cistern. So man breaks down and falls into a pit also. Whereas the first figure emphasizes the value of life, this one stresses its fragile nature. The pitcher would have been clay. Verse 7 describes the reversal of the process by which God originally created man. Okay, let's talk about the last, or verses 8 through 14, which is the epilogue and concluding summary. Well, Constable Notes interprets this in conclusion that Solomon repeated his original thesis and his counsel in view of life's realities. In between these statements, he sets forth his source of authority for writing, which we have in Ecclesiastes. So, verses 8 through 12 is the epilogue. So, if you'll read along with me, starting in verse 8, here again, he states again, like at the beginning of the book, "Vanity of vanities, says the preacher, all is vanity." Verse 9, in addition to being a wise man, the preacher also taught the people knowledge, and he pondered, searched out, and arranged many proverbs. The preacher sought to find delightful words and to write words of truth correctly. The words of wise men are like goads, and masters of these collections are like well-driven nails. They are given by one shepherd. But beyond this, my son, be warned. The writings of many books is endless, and excessive devotion to books is wearing to the body. Well, our interpretation of these verses are pretty straightforward. In verse 8, all human work and wisdom are ultimately, lacking ability to produce anything of ultimate substance or worth in this life. And this is just a reiteration from the very first chapter. Verses 9 through 12, the phrase "these collections" refer to other collections of wise sayings, like Job and Proverbs. Ultimately, all wisdom comes from God. Goads, referred to in verse 11, are prodding sticks, and people who master this wisdom literature are similar to well-driven nails in that they are stable and secure. Beyond this, in verse 12, evidently refers to beyond the wisdom literature that God has revealed, in view of verse 11. Solomon warned his disciple that looking elsewhere in other books for divine wisdom would only wear him out. Writing was well established as a hallmark of civilization from about 3500 BC onwards. This verse does not say that all study is tiring, though that is true. It means that study of books other than what God has revealed to learn wisdom is an endless, wearisome occupation. This is not to say we should avoid reading books other than the Bible. Nonetheless, the main place to look when you want to find true wisdom is God's Word. So he's directing us back in his time to the Septuagint, our time to the Bible. Then we come to the grand conclusion in verses 13 through 14. And if you'll read along with me. The conclusion, when all has been heard, is fear God and keep his commandments, because this applies to every person. For God will bring every act to judgment, everything which is hidden, whether it is good or evil. So Solomon's concluding statement reiterates what he had said earlier and elsewhere, like in Proverbs and Job. Trust and obedience are what everyone owes God in view of future judgment. Though a future judgment after death is indeed the solution to the enigma Solomon had observed in the unequal distribution of justice in human history, no evidence suggests that Solomon believed in or was aware of such a judgment. Life after death was an enigmatic to him as the unequal distribution of justice. His emphasis was on this life under the sun and its opportunities for service and enjoyment. He thought life after death offered no such opportunities. Therefore, he did not comment on any differences after death between the righteous and the wicked, the wise and the fools, man and beast. With the greater light of revelation that we enjoy, it is even more important for us to follow Solomon's counsel. We should be content to leave the enigmas of life in God's hands. We should also follow Solomon's wise counsel to enjoy life as God enables us to do so and to serve God acceptably while we can. What is the profit of living? What does a man get for all of his work? He gets the living God, and his whole profit consists of fearing him and obeying his word. Well, that's our concluding chapter, but I'd like to give a few concluding thoughts if you'll bear with me for just a few minutes longer. People have often searched for the meaning of life. I know I did when I was younger, in my younger youth. From philosopher to the common man, they and I have asked the questions like, why am I here? What is my purpose in life? Presuming there is no God nor life after death, many have concluded there is no purpose for living and fallen into despair or hedonism. But a search that begins with wrong assumptions invariably leads to wrong conclusions. If what we see in this life is all there is, then truly vanity of vanities, all is vanity. The preacher, with his personal experiences and God-given wisdom, has demonstrated that yes, life from an earthly perspective alone, life under the sun, is truly vanity. But he has also declared that by fearing God and keeping his commandments, one can endure the many vanities and perplexities of life, all the while enjoying the good things in life that God gives us, as expressed by the preacher himself. And I'm going to read something to you, and this is in quotations. What profit has the worker from that in which he labors? I have seen the God-given task with which the sons of men are to be occupied. He has made everything beautiful in its time. Also, he has put eternity in their hands, except that no one can find out the work that God does from beginning to end. We're just a speck of dust in time. I know that nothing is better for them than to rejoice and to do good in their lives, and also that every man should eat and drink and enjoy the good of all his labors. It is the gift of God. Ecclesiastes 3, 9 through 13. May we, like the preacher then, continue to seek out acceptable words, words of truth, that will serve as goads to direct us and as well-driven nails with which to build our lives. Especially those truths from Jesus, who has come and spoken words designed to help us weather the storms of life. He tells us in Matthew 7:22 through or 24 through 25, therefore whoever hears these sayings of mine and does them, I will liken him to a wise man who built his house on the rock. And the rain descended, the floods came, and the winds blew and beat on that house, and it did not fall, for it was founded on the rock. And obviously, the rock here is referring to Jesus Christ and the church he built the foundation on. So, the book of Ecclesiastes contains an argument that is very difficult to unfold because the ideas that connect succeeding portions of the text are not always easy to discover. This has led many a commentator to despair, as the following quotation illustrates. A connected and orderly argument, an elaborative arrangement of parts, is as little to be looked at for here as in the special portion of the book of Proverbs, which begins with chapter 10, or as in the alphabetical Psalms. One of the keys to staying with Solomon in his reasoning is to understand the perspective from which he spoke. Phrases such as under the sun and advantage, and remembering how much special revelation Solomon enjoyed, are absolutely crucial to understanding what he was and was not saying. The recurrence of other key phrases such as vanity and striving after win, does not know, cannot discover, and you don't know also help us. They note the movements of his thought from one section and emphasis to another. The accurate understanding of key terms such as wise, foolish, prosperity, adversity, righteousness, wicked, also clarifies Solomon's thoughts. His intent in his writings is to pass judgment on man's misguided endeavors at mastering life by pointing out its limits and mysteries. He would prefer that man replace such false and illusionary hopes with a confidence based on the joy of creation as God's gift. What Solomon observed about life is still as true today as when it was written and when he lived. Neither the progress of revelation nor the progress of civilization has proved the preacher's inspired book false or his advice bad. This book needs more popular exposition than it has received because it exposes the error of contemporary man's ways so effectively. Bible teachers and preachers have neglected it because it is difficult to understand and expound. Although I have attempted to do so in the past 12 weeks. Nevertheless, most people in our day live in a superficial world of unreality that Ecclesiastes cuts right through. Part of our difficulty in understanding the book is that we too think this way and assume Solomon was speaking on this level. However, he was dealing with the more fundamental issues of human existence that not many people think or talk about today. Folks, we are constantly in battle with the world around us that would keep us from thinking these thoughts of what's the purpose of life? Where am I at in God's grand scheme? And when I do enjoy life, is it worthy of God's judgment? Because we will all be drawn into judgment by the Lord. just as Solomon alluded to in chapter 12, verses 13 through 14. And I'm going to leave you with this last final thought. I want to read these verses over again, and then we'll conclude our series. The grand conclusion, chapter 12, verse 13. The conclusion, when all has been heard, is fear God and keep His commandments, because this applies to every person. For God will bring every act to judgment, everything which is hidden, whether it is good or evil. Folks, thank you for joining me for these past 12 weeks. I've enjoyed teaching this series. I pray that it'll be a blessing on you in your life, in your family's life, your grandchildren's life, your neighborhoods, where you go to church. I pray that this will sink in deeply and that you will ponder on this and not be distracted by life's everyday challenges. This is important, folks, and that's why I wanted to teach the past 12 weeks the book of Ecclesiastes. I pray that it's been a blessing to you. I know it has been to me. May God bless you, and come back for further studies with the Truth Finders class. Thank you for joining me today.